5 years. For 5 years, Victor Carbone tore New York apart searching for her. He was the most powerful mafia boss in the city. He could find anyone, make anyone talk, make anyone disappear. But the one woman who vanished from his bed, leaving only a diamond ring on his pillow, she was a ghost. Until today. Today, he found her in a tiny Brooklyn bakery. But what he discovered next made the most feared man in New York freeze like a statue. A 4-year-old boy ran out from the back room. A boy with gray eyes. Sharp, cold, unmistakable gray eyes. Victor's eyes. In the next 100 minutes, you will uncover a web of lies that spans 5 years. A mother who sacrificed everything to protect her son from a world of blood and bullets. And a grandmother so hungry for power, she was willing to destroy her own grandson. But here's the question that will keep you watching until the very last second. Why did a pregnant woman run from the man who loved her? Into a life of poverty and bruises? What terrifying secret was she hiding from? The answer will break your heart. This story holds a powerful truth. Real family is not about blood or power. It is about the people who choose to love you, protect you, and stand by you when the whole world turns against you. If you have ever fought for someone you love, this story will speak to your soul. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Hit that like button if you are ready to witness one of the most emotional mafia love stories ever told. And share this video with someone who believes that love can survive even the darkest betrayals. Now, let the story begin. The bell on the glass door announced his arrival. Victor Carbone stepped inside and the warm smell of vanilla and sugar surrounded him. He paused with one expensive leather shoe on the bakery floor and the other on the sidewalk outside. His men stood by the armored car, their hands near their weapons, confused. For 15 years, Victor had run New York's most powerful crime family, yet he never handled small details himself. Today, an instinct he could not explain had brought him here. The shop was far too small for a man who controlled Brooklyn's underworld. The walls held pictures of happy customers and handwritten notes of thanks. A menu on a chalkboard hung crookedly. As soft music played, he saw her. She was behind the counter with her back to him, tying on an apron. Her brown hair was pinned up, shorter than he remembered. She was thinner now, almost delicate, and old bruises marked her wrists from years of hard work. When she turned for something on a shelf, Victor's breath caught in his throat. Amelia! She was humming, focused on arranging pastries, and hadn't seen him. His hand clenched the door handle until his knuckles were white. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she disappeared from his life without a word. He woke one morning to an empty home and a diamond ring on his pillow. He knew he should leave now. He should get in the car and have Marco handle the wedding cake. Any man with his power would. But his feet were planted on the floor. Then Amelia looked up. Their eyes met. The color vanished from her face. A notepad fell from her hand and hit the counter softly. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Before he could find his voice, before the shock allowed him to speak, a child's voice came from the back room. The sound of little feet on the old floorboards grew louder, and a small boy ran out from behind the counter. He was holding a crayon drawing. "Mommy, Mommy." I finished my picture. The boy looked to be no more than 4 years old. He had on a worn blue shirt with a dinosaur. His brown hair was a mess, but it was his eyes that shattered Victor's world. They were gray and sharp as steel. They were unmistakably his own. The boy stopped when he saw the stranger, then pressed against Amelia's leg. He peeked out at Victor with a shy curiosity, and in his gaze, Victor saw his own reflection. Victor Carbone, the most feared man in New York, a man who ordered death without emotion, was frozen. He stood in a small bakery, staring at a 4-year-old boy with his eyes, his jaw, and his blood. Everything he knew about the last 5 years was a lie. If you want to know what happens next, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. Like this video if you want to see Victor face the truth. Share this with anyone who loves a good mafia romance. Now, let's go back 6 years in Victor Carbone's life. He walked into a small bar on Mulberry Street, but not for a drink. He was there to collect money from the owner, who was 3 months late on his payments. The place was dimly lit and smelled of old beer and smoke. Marco stayed close behind him, his hand on the gun under his jacket. But when Victor sat down in a corner booth, his entire world changed. A young woman came from the back carrying a tray of drinks. Her brown hair was tied back messily, with loose strands framing her face. She wore a simple white shirt and a black apron that showed her slender build, but she moved with a confident speed. She did not see Victor in the shadows. She spun around too quickly, and the tray of whiskey fell right onto his $3,000 suit. The alcohol soaked the fabric, its sharp smell rising in the air. Marco was on his feet instantly, his hand going for his weapon. The entire bar went silent. The owner hurried out, his face pale, stammering endless apologies. But the girl did not panic. She looked Victor directly in the eye, completely without fear. "I am sorry," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "But I would have seen you if you were not hiding in the dark." No one had ever dared to speak to him that way. He was Victor Carbone. People feared his name. They looked at the ground when he entered a room. Yet this young woman, with her green eyes and a liquor-soaked apron, treated him like any other customer. "Do you know who he is?" Marco growled. "Your boss is about to lose this whole place because of you." The girl glanced at Marco. Then her eyes returned to Victor. "I do not care who he is. I am a waitress. I spilled a drink, and I apologized. He can fire me if he wants, but I will not get on my knees and beg." Victor felt something new stir inside him. He had known many women, beautiful and powerful ones. They all wanted his money or his influence. They spoke with sweet words and did anything for his favor. This girl was different. She had no idea who he was, and probably would not care if she did. In her eyes, he saw only pride. She had nothing to lose. "What is your name?" Victor asked, his voice softening unexpectedly. She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Amelia. Amelia Weston. And who are you that makes this whole bar so afraid?" For the first time in years, Victor smiled. A real smile. "It does not matter. You owe me a new suit, Amelia. I will be back to collect it." He stood and left, leaving Marco in disbelief, and the owner sighing with relief. In the car, Marco asked if he should burn the bar down. Victor shook his head. "No, leave it alone. I am going back." And he did. He came back the next day, and the day after that. For 3 weeks straight, he sat in that same corner. He ordered a whiskey he never drank, just so he could watch the girl with brown hair. She moved between the tables, smiling at the customers, but never at him. Amelia Weston did not know the man in the corner was the most dangerous mafia boss in New York. She only knew he stared at her, and it made her uneasy. For the first time, Victor Carbone did not know how to get a woman's attention. She did not want his money or his power. She just wanted him to leave her alone. But Victor was not a man who ever accepted no for an answer, whether it was from rivals, enemies, or a defiant waitress. The 4th week, he started leaving tips that were 10 times the bill. Amelia returned every dollar. The 5th week, he had flowers delivered. Amelia gave them to the customers. The 6th week, he bought the bar and cleared the owner's debt just to keep her from being fired for rejecting him. When Amelia learned of this, she confronted him after her shift, her eyes burning with rage. "Do you think you can buy me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you think your money will make me fall for you like all the others? I know who you are now, Victor Carbone. Everyone here knows you are a killer. You are the darkness they all fear. I would sooner starve than accept anything from you." Victor stood there, completely stunned. He was used to being feared, hated, or used. He was not used to a woman telling him she would rather die than be with him. Victor did not sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse high above the city, thinking of the girl with the unbreakable pride. Her words were true. He was a killer. He was darkness. He did not deserve someone as pure as Amelia Weston. But Victor Carbone did not know how to let go. He only knew how to take what he wanted. He stopped all the grand gestures. No more flowers, no more large tips. Instead, he simply came to the bar every night. He sat in his corner with a book and a glass of whiskey. He did not look at her or speak to her. He was just a quiet presence. A month went by. Amelia's anger faded into curiosity. She would glance his way when she thought he was not looking. She saw him reading books on history and art. She saw him smile as an old couple danced to a jazz song. And every night, she saw him put money into the donation box near the door. Amelia started to see past the rumors. She saw a man named Victor Carbone, not the ruthless mob boss everyone feared. He was a lonely person, fighting against a lifetime of shadows. One quiet, rainy evening, she joined him at his table. They simply watched each other for a long time without a word. Finally, Amelia broke the silence. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why do you keep trying?" Victor shut his book, his eyes fixed on hers. He told her the truth. "Because you are the first person who makes me want to be good." That was the night everything changed. He spoke of a father he never knew and a mother who was cold as stone. He described a life forced upon him as a boy. Amelia shared her own story of the orphanage and the pain she endured. She told him about her simple dream of a small bakery. They came from separate worlds, but they both had invisible wounds. Their love was born in that moment. It was a secret. It was dangerous. Victor found a small place for them in Brooklyn, hidden from everything. It was far from his empire and its judging eyes. They would meet late at night after the city went to sleep. She showed him how to bake bread. He showed her how to dance. They found joy and shared sorrow. They loved like there was no tomorrow. An entire year felt like a beautiful dream. Then one snowy winter evening, Victor got down on one knee. He held out a diamond ring. He asked her to be his wife, publicly and without fear. Through her tears, Amelia said yes. The ring felt perfect on her finger. But they were blind to the truth. Their perfect world was under surveillance. A terrible darkness waited right outside their door. The most powerful person in the Carbone family was aware of everything. And Catherine Carbone would never let her son wed a girl from an orphanage. Nothing occurred in her world without her consent. She had eyes and ears in every dark corner of the city. So when Victor started staying out late, smiling at nothing, and looking softer than ever before, she sensed a problem. She gave the order to have him watched. The news they brought back filled her with a suffocating fury. Her son, the heir to their entire empire and New York's strongest mob boss, loved a waitress from a rundown bar. She looked at the hidden pictures of them together. They were walking in a park. He was kissing her forehead. He was on one knee with a diamond ring. Her wine glass shattered against the floor. This was an outrage. It was a disgrace to the Carbone name. Catherine demanded a full report on Amelia Weston. 2 days later, a thick file was on her desk. Every word she read deepened her contempt. Amelia Weston was born in a city hospital. Her mother was an addict who sold herself. Her father was not named. The mother died from her habit when Amelia was just 3. She grew up in St. Mary Orphanage for the next 15 years. The files noted abuse from an official there, proven by the marks on her back. At 18, she walked out with absolutely nothing. She had no schooling, no relatives, and no prospects. She took any menial job she could find to stay alive. She was a complete nobody. And this was the girl her son wanted to make his wife. Catherine stared out at the city, her expression frozen. She had dedicated her life to creating this dynasty. She suffered through a terrible marriage and survived mob wars. She gave up everything to put her son at the top. Now he planned to waste it all on some girl from a broken system. She refused to let that happen. She summoned her most loyal men. The plan was simple. Amelia would vanish without a trace. But first, Catherine needed to see this girl for herself. She had to look into the eyes of the woman who had captivated her son. A week passed, and Catherine walked into the bar. She was dressed in expensive black clothes and wore a fortune in pearls. She moved through the cheap room like royalty visiting the poor. Amelia was cleaning a table when Catherine took a seat. Amelia gave her a warm, professional smile. "May I get you something?" Catherine's gaze was full of scorn. She saw the diamond on Amelia's hand, the one her son had given her, and rage burned within her. "You are Amelia Weston." It was a declaration, not a question. "The girl from St. Mary. Your mother sold her body. Your father is unknown. You come from nothing. You are nothing. And you believe you are worthy of my son." Amelia was paralyzed. The color left her face. She knew who this was immediately. Those icy eyes, that severe face, the look that made her feel small. It was Catherine Carbone. It was Victor's mother. She was the queen of New York's criminal world. Catherine's voice was like poison wrapped in honey. "I know all about you. I know about the beatings. I know you took food just to eat. I know you are completely broke. Did you really think you could charm my son and become the lady of the Carbone house? You were wrong." Catherine rose and moved toward Amelia, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You will walk away from my son. You will vanish from his world completely. And if you refuse, I will make you vanish for good." Then she left. Amelia stood shaking in the silent bar. The ring on her finger felt like a lead weight. She understood then that her time of joy was over. 2 weeks later, Amelia learned she was carrying a child. She sat in the small bathroom, looking at the test in her hands. Tears ran down her face. She was happy, but she was also terrified. Catherine would never allow this child to be born. But Amelia loved Victor, and she would protect this baby, the symbol of their love. She decided to tell Victor everything that evening. She would tell him about their new family, about how they could face anything together. She made his favorite meal and lit some candles. But Victor never arrived. He called her. There was an emergency. He had to go out of town for a couple of days for a critical meeting. He was sorry and said he would see her soon. Amelia told him it was all right and that she would wait. She kept her secret, saving it for his return. She had no idea that this was the opening Catherine needed. Later that night, a loud banging on the door woke her from her sleep. Her heart pounded in her chest. The door burst open. 4 large men in black suits filled the room. They looked violent, and they were armed. Amelia screamed and made a run for the window, but one of the men caught her by the hair. He threw her down onto the floor. She shivered in fear, her hands automatically going to her belly to protect her baby. That is when Catherine entered the apartment. She was wearing a dark fur coat. Her eyes were like ice, and she had a terrible smile on her face. It was the smile of a person with absolute power over others. "I told you what would happen," Catherine said calmly. "I offered you a way out, but you ignored me. You believed love would conquer me. You were a fool." At Catherine's signal, a man pulled Amelia up and pushed her hard against the wall. She felt the cold metal of a gun against her head. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to scream. She would not give Catherine the satisfaction of seeing her terror. "Do you think I was unaware?" Catherine came closer, looking at Amelia's stomach with pure hatred. "You are pregnant with my son's child, a tainted child from a nobody. Did you think I would permit that?" Amelia begged through her tears. "Please, not the baby. I will do whatever you ask. The baby has done nothing wrong." Catherine's laughter was a cold, sharp sound in the room. "Good. Then listen carefully. You will get out of New York this evening. You will vanish from my son's world. You will not call him. You will not try to find him. You will never speak of this child. Do this, and I will permit you both to live." She threw a packet on the floor. It held $5,000 and a bus ticket with no destination. "This is more than you are worth. Someone like you should thank me for your life." "What if I say no?" Amelia whispered. Catherine just smiled. "Then you die right here. And your baby dies with you. And no one will ever find either of you. Victor will believe you left him. He will think you used him for his money and then betrayed him. He will learn to hate you. Then he will forget you. No matter what you choose, you will be gone from my son's life. The only question is if you leave alive or dead." Amelia squeezed her eyes shut as tears streamed down her face. She pictured Victor's smile and the safety of his arms. She remembered the promises they made to each other in the dark. A part of her wanted to fight, to scream the truth, but she looked down at her stomach. She thought about the new life growing inside her. She could not risk her child. She would not let her baby die. "I will go," Amelia whispered, her voice as broken as her heart. "But let me leave one thing. Something to show Victor I did not want this." Catherine thought for a second, then agreed. "You can leave the ring. Nothing else. No letter. No explanation." That night, Amelia left the diamond ring on Victor's empty pillow. She took one last look at the small apartment. It was the place they had built their dreams. Then she walked out into the cold night. One hand protected her stomach. The other held an envelope full of cash. She had no destination. She had no idea how she would survive. She only knew she had to protect her child. That meant giving up her love, her happiness, and her entire world. Amelia took a bus to Philadelphia. From there, she went to Baltimore, and then back to New Jersey. She was a hunted animal, never staying anywhere for long. She was terrified Catherine would find her. The $5,000 ran out in 2 months. She found a cheap room in a rough part of Brooklyn. It was far from anywhere Victor would ever be. She got a job as a waitress and hid her growing stomach under a loose uniform. She worked 12 hours a day. Her legs swelled and her back was in constant pain. But she never rested. A day off meant no money for food. At night, in her damp, small room, she would rest a hand on her stomach and talk to her baby. She told her child about his father. She described a man with gray eyes and a smile that was rare but kind. She promised the baby she would love him enough for both of them. Amelia gave birth in a city hospital during a thunderstorm. Complications required surgery. She lay on the operating table completely alone. When a doctor handed her the baby, Amelia finally broke down and cried. The baby boy was small and red, his eyes sealed shut. But when he finally opened them, she saw familiar gray eyes staring back. They were Victor's eyes. She named him Ethan, Ethan Weston. She was too afraid to use the name Carbone. Amelia had to go back to work just 2 weeks later. The hospital bills were piling up. She paid an old neighbor a little money to watch Ethan. She worked 3 jobs, a diner in the morning, a laundromat in the afternoon, and a bar at night. She worked 20 hours a day. She survived on 4 hours of sleep. Her body started to fail. She lost too much weight and dark circles formed under her eyes. But one look at Ethan gave her the will to continue. When Ethan turned 2, the landlord started to bother her. He would come to her door late at night. He said if she could not pay with cash, she could pay in other ways. Amelia refused. He threw her and her son out into the street in the middle of winter. She held Ethan close against the freezing wind with nowhere to go. That was the night she met Father Thomas. He was an old priest at St. Michael's Church. He found the mother and child shivering on the church steps and brought them inside. He gave them a small room behind the church for free. He only asked that Amelia help keep the church clean. Father Thomas never asked about her past. He never judged her. He just helped them quietly. But Amelia's peace did not last. When Ethan was 3, he started having chest pains. He struggled to breathe and his lips would turn blue. Doctors found a problem with his heart. They said he was born with it. He needed surgery immediately or he would die. The operation cost $150,000. It was more money than she could earn in her entire life. She went to loan sharks, knowing the interest rates would destroy her. She had no other options. She used the money for Ethan's medicine to buy him more time. She hoped for a miracle. With the small amount left, she opened a little bakery. It was in a poor area with few customers, but it was her only hope. 5 years. Amelia lived in hell for 5 years. 5 years of working herself to the bone. 5 years of crying alone at night. She watched her son get weaker every day, and she was powerless to stop it. For 5 years, she kept her secret about Victor, his family, and the ring she left behind. Every night she prayed for Ethan. She begged God to let her son live a long and healthy life. Then, one quiet afternoon, the bell on the bakery door chimed. Victor Carbone walked inside. 5 years of hiding, running, and secrets all came crashing down the moment his gray eyes met hers. Now, after seeing her in the bakery, Victor could not think straight. He sat in his car and told Marco to just drive. His mind raced with 1,000 questions. That boy was his son. He knew it with total certainty. The gray eyes, the shape of his face, the way he tilted his head, it was all him. But why did Amelia say nothing? Why did she hide his son from him for 5 years? Why did she leave him with no explanation at all? At exactly 7 that evening, Victor stood at the back door of the bakery. He was alone. He had no driver, no guards, and no weapon. For the first time in 15 years, he was unprotected on the streets of Brooklyn. He did not care. He just needed answers. Amelia opened the door with a cold expression. She did not speak. She just moved aside to let him enter. When Victor stepped inside, his heart tightened. This was where his son lived. The room was smaller than his bathroom. A single bed was pushed against a wall with old, clean sheets. A corner was filled with cheap, faded plastic toys. The walls were covered in a child's drawings. There were stick figures, houses, and smiling suns. One picture showed a tall person and a small person. Underneath, clumsy letters spelled Mommy and Me. There was no daddy in the pictures. Victor stood in the center of the room, feeling a sharp pain in his chest. His son, the heir to the Carbone fortune, lived in this tiny room. He played with broken toys while Victor slept in a mansion. "Where is Ethan?" Victor asked, his voice harsh. "He is asleep in the other room." Amelia crossed her arms. She stood far away from him, as if she feared his touch. She was exhausted from work, but she knew this fight was coming. Victor finally looked at her, his eyes burning with intensity. "Explain. Why did you leave? Why did you hide my son from me? Do you have any idea how hard I looked for you? I hired private investigators. I offered rewards. I searched this entire city for you, and you were here, less than 20 minutes from my home." Amelia laughed, but it was a bitter sound full of unshed tears. "You looked for me. Did you really? Or did you just believe what your mother told you? Did you believe I was a liar who only wanted money?" Victor froze. "My mother? Do not act like you are innocent, Victor." Amelia's voice trembled with 5 years of pain. "Do you think I wanted this? To leave you? To have my baby alone in a public hospital? Do you think I wanted to work 3 jobs, to be harassed, to be homeless, to watch my son get sick while I had no way to save him?" "What is wrong with Ethan?" Victor demanded, his voice filled with sudden dread. "He has a congenital heart defect," Amelia said, and every word was like a knife. His words cut into Victor like a shard of glass. "He needs surgery now. It costs $150,000. I borrowed from criminals. I sold my own blood. I did anything I could just to afford his medicine. Every single day, I am terrified Ethan will not wake up. And where were you? You were picking out wedding cakes with some other woman." Victor felt the world disappear from under his feet. His son had a heart condition. His son could die, and he had known nothing for 5 long years. He knew nothing. "Why did you not tell me?" Victor asked, his voice finally breaking. Why did you not call me, or write me, or do anything? Amelia stared at him, her green eyes full of rage and sorrow. Because your mother held a gun to my head. She told me if I ever tried to contact you, she would kill me and she would kill our child. Victor stood completely still, as if he had been struck by lightning. Every sound faded away. His mother. His mother did this. No, he whispered. That is not possible. My mother would never do that. Amelia's voice was as cold as ice when she cut him off. She came to our apartment with 4 bodyguards. She put a gun to my head. She knew I was pregnant with your child. Her threat was clear. If I did not vanish, she would end my life and our babies. She threw $5,000 and a bus ticket at me, like I was a stray animal she was shooing away. She called me trash. She said I was not fit to carry the Carbone name. But the worst part, Victor, was that she was right about you. She said you would never pick me over your family. For 5 years I wondered every day if you would have chosen me if I had told you the truth, or if you would have believed your mother, just like you always did. Victor stumbled backward until his back hit the wall. The air left his body. His mind raced with broken memories. The empty apartment, the diamond ring on the pillow, the crushing pain in his chest, and his mother holding him, telling him Amelia had used him for money. He believed her. He believed every single word. He could not accept that Amelia would leave without a good reason. He needed an explanation to endure the pain, and his mother provided one. It was a complete lie. I searched for you, Victor said, his voice shaking. For the first 2 years, I searched. I hired the best people. I spent millions, but they found nothing. That is because your mother paid them not to, Amelia answered, her tone filled with bitterness. You want to know why no one ever found me right here in Brooklyn? Because Catherine Carbone controls this entire city. She knew where I was for all 5 years. She just never told you. Victor slid down the wall to the floor, his legs giving out beneath him. He sat there, his hands clutching his head. The most feared mafia boss in New York looked like a little boy, betrayed by the person he trusted most in the world. 5 years, he whispered. For 5 years, I hated you. I thought you abandoned me. I tried to forget you, but I never could. And this whole time my son was growing up without me. He lived in poverty with a serious heart condition. Meanwhile, I was in a mansion worth millions, completely unaware he was alive. Amelia looked at him. For the first time in 5 years, she did not see a cold-hearted killer. She saw the man she once loved, the man who had proposed to her in the snow, falling to pieces before her. She wanted to comfort him, to hold him like she used to. But 5 years of pain had built a wall between them that was too high to cross. Does Ethan know about me? Victor asked, his gray eyes swimming in pain. Does he know I am his father? Amelia shook her head. He asks about his dad every single day. He sees other kids getting picked up from school by their fathers, and he asks me where his is. I never know what to say. I just tell him his daddy is far away. He draws pictures for me, but he always leaves a space open next to us, as if waiting for someone to be there. Tears streamed down Victor's face. It was the first time he had cried in 15 years. He cried for the 5 years that were stolen from him. He cried for the son who grew up without a father, and for the woman he loved who endured it all alone. He cried for the betrayal from his own mother, the woman who took his family and left him in a world of lies. Just then, the door to the back room opened. Ethan stood there, half asleep, holding a worn teddy bear. Mommy? I heard crying. Amelia hurried over and knelt down to him. It is okay, sweetie. Mommy just has a guest. Go back to bed. But Ethan had already seen Victor on the floor. His eyes grew wide. It is the man from the bakery, Ethan said, his voice sleepy but curious. Who are you? Why are you crying? When I am sad, my mommy hugs me, and it makes me feel better. Do you want a hug? Victor looked at the 4-year-old boy. He had the same gray eyes. He was offering comfort with such innocence. And Victor's heart, hardened by years of violence, shattered completely. Victor left the bakery near midnight, after Ethan was asleep again. He did not say goodbye. He just gave Amelia one last look filled with pain and promised he would be back. He needed time. He needed to be sure. He had to know for certain that Amelia was telling the truth before he faced his mother. On the drive home, Victor called Marco. His voice was ice, empty of any feeling. "Get to the penthouse now. Bring your most trusted men. We have work to do." An hour later, Marco and 3 of Victor's most loyal soldiers were in his office. They watched their boss, worried. They had never seen him this way. His eyes were red, his jaw was tight, and a silent rage radiated from him that was more frightening than any shouting. "I need you to look into something," Victor said, his voice dangerously calm. "5 years ago, the night Amelia vanished, someone visited our apartment. I need to know who it was. Find camera footage, find witnesses, find anything, and get me the medical records for a child. His name is Ethan Weston, 4 years old, living in Brooklyn." Marco simply nodded. He knew not to ask questions. 24 hours later, Marco came back with a briefcase. His face was pale and his hands trembled slightly as he placed it on the desk. "Boss," he said, his voice rough, "I found it all. But you are not going to like it." Victor opened the case. The first thing he saw was a photo from a security camera at his old apartment building. The image was old, but he could clearly see a black limousine parked outside at 11 at night. It was his mother's car, on the exact night Amelia disappeared. Next was a statement from the security guard. Marco had found him in Florida and made him talk. The guard said 4 men in black suits and an older woman went up to Victor's floor. They stayed for 30 minutes, then left. The woman paid him to forget everything he saw. The last file was from the private investigators Victor had hired. Marco had checked their finances. He found a huge payment from Catherine Carbone's account just 2 days after Victor hired them. They were paid to fail. They were paid to tell him Amelia had vanished. Victor read each page, his hands shaking with rage. The vein in his temple throbbed. Everything Amelia told him was true. His mother had planned it all. She drove away the woman he loved. She hid his son from him. She paid people to make sure he never found them. For 5 years, his mother had watched him hurt, had comforted him with lies, all while knowing where Amelia and his sick son were. "There is one more thing, boss," Marco said. He handed Victor a medical file, the boy's records. Victor opened it, and his blood ran cold. Ethan Weston, age 4, diagnosis, congenital heart disease. It was a ventricular septal defect that needed surgery right away. The prognosis without the operation was progressive heart failure. The doctors estimated he had less than 2 years to live. The cost of the surgery was $150,000. The payment status was unpaid. The boy was on a waiting list. Victor's eyes fell to the doctor's notes. The mother had asked to delay the surgery several times because she could not afford it. The patient was on medication, but it was not a permanent solution. The doctor strongly recommended surgery within 6 months to prevent deadly complications. He closed the file and shut his eyes. His son was dying. His son could die while he had hundreds of millions of dollars, unaware he even existed. Amelia had fought all alone to keep their son alive, borrowing money from dangerous people, doing anything she could. And he had been choosing wedding cakes with another woman. Victor stood and looked out over the city lights of New York. In a cramped room above a bakery, his son slept with a failing heart. Miles away in a Manhattan mansion, his mother rested in silence, completely unaware that her sins were about to be exposed. The following morning, Victor went to her estate on the Upper East Side. He gave no warning and brought no guards. He carried only a briefcase full of proof. A guard at the gate moved to block him, but the look in Victor's eyes made the man retreat without a word. Victor walked into the mansion and went directly to the breakfast room. Catherine was there, drinking her tea like any other day. She looked perfect in a silk dress, a high society woman without a care. Seeing Victor, she smiled and lowered her cup. "My dear son, what brings you here so early? Is it something important?" Stop pretending, Mother. Victor tossed the briefcase on the table, and papers spilled out. I know everything you did. The evidence covered the table. Surveillance photos, sworn statements, and bank records. She showed no surprise. She showed no fear. She calmly took another drink of tea before setting the cup down. Her composure was chilling. So, you found the girl, she said, her voice light. I knew this day might come. Victor's jaw tightened. That girl has a name. Her name is Amelia. And my son is Ethan, your grandson. You let him live in squalor for 4 years. Catherine rose and stared out the window at her flawless garden. She did not look at him as she spoke. I did what was required to protect our family. Who is Amelia? She is a nameless orphan raised in a group home, the daughter of a street worker. She has no money, no connections. She would ruin you, Victor. A permanent mark on the Carbone name. Our rivals would use her to destroy you. I could not let that happen. You held a weapon to the head of the woman I love. Victor moved closer, his voice shaking with rage. You threatened to murder her and my son. You forced her away when she was pregnant. You knew for 5 years that I had a child, and you said nothing. Catherine finally faced him, her eyes as cold as granite. And I would do it again, she replied, with no regret in her voice. Do you believe I did this from hate? I did it from love. I have spent my life building this empire for you. I will not allow some worthless girl to tear it all down. Worthless? Victor's laugh was a broken, harsh sound. She raised our son by herself for 4 years. She worked 3 jobs, took money from loan sharks, and sold her own blood for his heart medicine. She is stronger than anyone you know. And you? You are a coward who used money and threats against a defenseless pregnant woman. Is that how you protect this family? Watch what you say, Victor, Catherine snapped. I am still your mother. You have no right to speak to me that way. You lost that right the day you sent Amelia away, Victor said, his voice now dangerously quiet. I will never forgive you for this. Catherine's eyes narrowed as she sized up her son. She saw that he meant it, but she was not one to back down. So what will you do? She asked. End your engagement to Alexandra? Destroy our alliance with the Benedetti family? Do you understand what that means? Don Benedetti will see it as an insult. He will start a war. We will lose half our allies and territory. You will make this family a target for everyone. All for a nobody and her illegitimate child. That child is your grandson. Victor's voice was like steel. He has Carbone blood. I will not let my son grow up without a father like I did. I will end the engagement. I will bring Amelia and Ethan to my home. And if Don Benedetti wants war, then he will get one. For the first time, Catherine saw defiance in her son's eyes. The son who had always obeyed her was now standing against her for a woman. If you do this, you will be on your own, she said. I will not shield you from what comes next. When everything you have is gone, I will not be there. You will lose me. I lost you 5 years ago, Victor answered, turning to leave. I just finally realized it. He walked out of the mansion and did not look back. Catherine remained at the window, her eyes cold with calculation. Defeat was not an option. If Victor refused to listen, she had other methods. She picked up her phone and made a call. Her voice was pure ice when the person answered. I have some information about Victor Carbone and his weakness that you may find useful. After leaving his mother's home, Victor drove straight to Amelia's bakery. He stood outside her door for a long time before he finally knocked. When Amelia opened the door, she saw his exhaustion and his resolve. I need to see my son, he said. Please, just give me one chance. After a long silence, Amelia moved aside to let him in. After that day, Victor came to see Ethan every single day. He did not come with bodyguards or armored cars. He drove a simple vehicle, parked it blocks away, and walked to the bakery like a normal man. At first, Ethan was timid and hid behind his mother, but Victor was patient. He got down on the floor to be at the boy's level and offered to draw with him. His drawing of a dinosaur was so terrible that Ethan started laughing, breaking the tension between them. The next day, Victor brought a new set of crayons. It was a professional set with 72 colors. Ethan's eyes lit up as if he were looking at treasure. "Uncle Victor, it has a gold one," he yelled, holding it up. "Mommy, look, it's gold like the sun." A warmth spread through Victor's chest as he watched his son, a feeling he had not experienced in 15 years as a crime boss. The following days, he brought a teddy bear, a puzzle, and a toy car. Amelia tried to refuse the expensive gifts, but she could not deny the pure joy on Ethan's face. The boy had never owned so many new things. He had never had someone bring him a gift every day. And with Ethan, Victor learned how to truly smile. Not the cold smile of a boss, but the real smile of a father. A week later, Ethan stopped calling him Uncle Victor. The boy would run to the door at the sound of his knock and wrap his arms around Victor's legs, shouting, "Victor is here!" They would draw together on the floor, making clumsy pictures of a house with 3 people. Ethan was in the middle with his mommy on one side. On the other side was a tall man, with the name Victor written underneath. The empty space in Ethan's world was finally filled. From the kitchen, Amelia watched them. She saw the most dangerous man in New York on his hands and knees, letting Ethan ride on his back like a horse. She saw him pretend to fall just to hear Ethan laugh. She saw him gently wipe the boy's runny nose with a clumsy tenderness. And her heart, which had been frozen with pain for 5 years, slowly began to thaw. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Victor watched Amelia at the sink. "Does he know that I am his father?" he asked quietly. Amelia paused. "He knows a man comes every day, and that man loves him. For now, that is enough. We can tell him later." Victor nodded, though she could not see him. "I spoke with the hospital," he said. "The best surgeons in the city are ready to operate on Ethan. I have covered all of the expenses. He is going to be healthy, Amelia. I give you my word." Amelia stood completely still, her shoulders shaking. She refused to turn around, not wanting him to see her cry. For 5 long years, she had been on her own. For 5 years, she had gone to sleep terrified that her son might not wake up. Now, in a single week, Victor had given her something she could not achieve in 4 years. She hated the gratitude she felt. She hated that her heart was softening toward him. But she could not stop it. Every time she saw him hold Ethan, every time she heard her son's laughter, she remembered why she fell in love with him. And she was terrified she was falling in love all over again. 2 weeks after Victor's daily visits began, things looked brighter. The surgery was scheduled, and Ethan seemed stronger. But fate is rarely gentle with those who have already suffered so much. That afternoon, Ethan suddenly stopped drawing in the bakery. His face went white. "Mommy, my chest hurts," he gasped, grabbing his shirt. "I cannot breathe." Amelia ran to him. Her own heart stopped when she saw his lips were turning blue. The boy collapsed, his eyes shut tight as his small body began to shake. Amelia screamed and called for an ambulance, her hands trembling so hard she could barely dial the phone. She gathered her son in her arms, feeling the wild, weak flutter of his heart. "Ethan, look at me," she cried out. "You have to breathe. Do not leave me. Please do not leave Mommy." The ambulance came in 10 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime to Amelia. They put Ethan on a stretcher with an oxygen mask and rushed him away. Amelia sat beside him, holding his hand, watching the heart monitor. With her other hand, she called Victor. Only her choked sobs came through the phone. "Ethan. Hospital. Heart." Victor heard all he needed to know. The call from Amelia came during a meeting with his men. He shot up from his seat, sending furniture flying as he stormed from the room like a madman. He got in his car and floored it, tearing through New York traffic as if the laws were for other people. Red lights and blaring horns meant nothing to him. All he could hear was Amelia's broken voice and the image of Ethan, lifeless, burned into his mind. 20 minutes. He made the drive from Manhattan to Brooklyn in a record-breaking 20 minutes. He abandoned the car unlocked at the emergency entrance and charged inside. He shoved his way through the crowd, shouting Ethan's name until a nurse finally led him to the intensive care unit. Amelia stood there, her face a pale mask of tears. When she saw him, she collapsed into his arms, trembling uncontrollably. "He is in there," she cried out. His heart stopped on the way here. They had to shock him. "He cannot die, Victor. He just cannot." Victor held her, feeling her entire body quake. He had nothing to say. There was nothing he could do. For the first time, the most feared man in New York was completely helpless. He could order a man's death without a second thought, but could do nothing to help his son beyond those doors. 2 hours passed before the doctor emerged. "The boy is stable for now," he said, his voice exhausted but relieved. "But his heart condition is critical. We must operate immediately. The cost is considerable, and so are the risks." "Do it," Victor said without hesitation. "Give my son whatever he needs. I will pay any price. Get the finest surgeons and the best equipment. Money is not an issue. Just save my son." That night, with Ethan in recovery, Victor stayed at his bedside. He did not leave for a single moment. He clutched Ethan's little hand, watching his chest barely rise and fall. Wires and machines seemed to swallow the boy's small frame. The only sound was the steady pulse of the heart monitor. Victor stared at his son's face, eyes sealed shut, and a tear slid down his own cheek. 4 years. For 4 years this boy had been alive, and he never knew. For 4 years this child had fought a terrible disease without a father. He might lose his son before ever telling him the truth. For the first time in his 36 years of life, Victor Carbone prayed. He fumbled for words to a God he never acknowledged. He just squeezed his son's hand, closed his eyes, and pleaded with the darkness. "Please let my son live. I will give up everything. Just give my child a chance." Amelia watched him from a small chair, and she realized that whatever happened, she was no longer facing it by herself. While Victor kept his vigil, Catherine Carbone sat in her study, glaring at a photo from her informant. It showed Victor holding Amelia, his face a mask of love and fear. Catherine gritted her teeth, her nails digging into the wood of her desk. Her son had made his choice, and she had lost. But Catherine did not accept defeat. She warned Victor of the consequences. Now he would learn them. She picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. A rough voice answered. "Mrs. Carbone, it is an honor." "I have the information you need, Tony," Catherine said, her voice like ice. "The location of the woman and the child. And I know precisely when Victor will be gone." In a derelict warehouse, Tony Moreno smiled. He was a ghost from Victor Carbone's past, a rival stripped of his power 5 years ago and left hungry for payback. Now, revenge was being served to him by Victor's own mother. "What's your price?" he asked, certain Catherine had one. "I want the girl Amelia, gone from this world," she answered, her voice like ice. "But the boy lives. He is a Carbone." Tony's laugh was a cruel thing in the empty space. "Consider it done, Mrs. Carbone." But he was already planning more. He would not just take Amelia. He would bring Victor to his knees, forcing the great Mafia boss to beg for the lives he cherished. The child was the key. After the call, Tony gathered his crew. He brought together 12 of his most brutal men. On a dusty table, he unrolled a map of Brooklyn, pointing to Amelia's bakery, the hospital, and Victor's usual routes. "Victor Carbone has a weakness," Tony declared, his finger jabbing the map. "A woman and her son. We take them both. To get them back, he will give us everything. The Eastern Territory, his entire operation, perhaps even his own life." The men's laughter filled the darkness. They had been waiting for this moment. The plan was simple. They would move after Ethan left the hospital, when Victor felt the danger had passed. At the hospital, Victor knew nothing of the coming storm. He sat by his son's bed as Ethan recovered from surgery. He had guards posted, believing the threat was outside. He never suspected the real enemy was his mother. From her grand home, Catherine waited for news of her son's ruin. She told herself this was for the family, to protect the bloodline's honor. But she knew the truth was darker. This was about pride. It was about her refusal to lose control over her son. It was the selfish act of a woman who never knew love. Her betrayal was about to unleash a hell she could not imagine. 5 days later, Ethan was released from the hospital. The boy was weak, but his spirit was bright. Victor wanted them safe in his mansion, protected by walls and men on watch around the clock. But Amelia said no. She wanted to go back to the bakery, to a home that felt normal and safe for Ethan. She would not rush her son into Victor's world. Victor finally agreed, but placed 2 bodyguards outside her door. He thought this would be enough. He did not know it was the last choice they would make in peace. That evening, a staged police raid on one of Victor's warehouses pulled him away. It was an emergency he had to handle personally. He kissed his sleeping son, promised Amelia he would return quickly, and left. He did not know it was a trap, designed to leave them exposed. 2 hours after Victor was gone, the guards outside the bakery died without a sound. Suppressed rounds found them before they could reach for their weapons. Inside, Amelia was reading. A strange noise at the front door made her get up. Her heart stopped when the door splintered open. 4 men in black stormed in, their faces hidden, their guns raised. Amelia did not scream. She spun and ran for the back room where Ethan slept. A mother's instinct was all that mattered. She had to get her son out. But they were on her in a second. A hand tangled in her hair, slamming her down. She fought back, scratching and biting. She grabbed a heavy pan from the stove and swung it, catching one man in the face. Blood sprayed. For a moment she was a cornered animal protecting her young. But there were too many. A fist connected with her temple, and the world swam. As she tried to stand, a kick to her stomach stole her breath. They beat her until she was a broken shape on the kitchen floor, her own blood pooling around her. "Mommy!" Ethan's cry came from his room. "Mommy, I'm scared." Amelia tried to move, but her body was stone. She could only watch, helpless, as a man entered Ethan's room and pulled the terrified boy out. Ethan's screams filled the small home. He saw his mother on the floor, still and covered in blood, and his cries became desperate. "Mommy, wake up! Please, don't die! I'm so scared!" "Take them," a voice commanded. "Don't hurt the kid. He's our leverage." They threw Amelia into a sack and tossed her in a truck. Another man carried Ethan, whose calls for his mother grew fainter as the truck drove into the night. The bakery was left in ruins. The front door hung broken. Smeared blood marked the floor. Outside, 2 dead men stared with empty eyes at a black sky. Miles away, Victor Carbone was resolving a fake police issue, completely unaware that his world had just been stolen from him. Victor got back to the bakery at 3 in the morning. He had felt a cold dread all night. When he saw the broken door and the bodies of his men on the pavement, his heart stopped beating. He bolted from the car and ran inside. What he saw shattered him. The place was destroyed. Furniture was flipped over. Blood stained the kitchen tiles. Amelia and Ethan were gone. Victor fell to his knees, his hand touching the cooling blood, and a raw scream of pure agony was torn from his soul. Marco rushed in behind him, his face pale with shock. He had never seen his boss so broken. "Boss, your phone," Marco said quietly. "You have a message." With a shaking hand, Victor took the phone. A video had been sent from an unknown number. He pressed play. The image made his blood run cold. Amelia sat on a concrete floor, her hands bound. Her face was a mask of bruises and blood. She stared at the camera, not with fear, but with exhausted defiance. In a dark corner behind her, Ethan was curled into a small ball, sobbing for his mother. Then, a new face filled the screen. Tony Moreno. His smile was poison. "Long time, Carbone," he sneered. "I have something of yours. You want them back alive? You know the price. The Eastern Territory, your entire network. Every contact, every location. You have 48 hours. Try anything funny, and I start sending you the kids' fingers. The video went black. Victor stared at the screen, his grip so tight the phone cracked. 48 hours. He had to save them. But giving up his network meant death for hundreds of loyal men and their families. He could not sacrifice them. But he could not let Amelia and Ethan die. Find them, Victor ordered, his voice dangerously calm. Use everything we have. I want their location in 24 hours, and I want to know who sold us out. Marco nodded and left to begin the hunt. Alone in the wreckage, Victor stared at a child's drawing on the wall. It showed 3 people holding hands under a bright sun. He would find them, he would bring them home, then he would destroy everyone responsible. 12 hours later, Marco returned with news that hit Victor like a physical blow. We traced the calls to Tony, Marco began, his voice hesitant. Boss, they came from your mother's mansion. 2 of them. One call was made 2 weeks ago, the other was made right before they were taken. Victor stood completely still. He remembered his mother's cold eyes, her voice promising him there would be consequences. She had done it. His own mother delivered her grandson and the woman her son loved to an enemy. She put Ethan's life in a killer's hands to punish him. Is there more? Victor asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Marco swallowed hard. Our contact says Catherine told Tony to kill only Amelia, but Tony won't listen. He will use them both to control you, and when he is done, he will kill them both. Victor closed his eyes and took a long, slow breath. When he opened them, his gaze was frigid. Find Tony's location, he ordered, each word sharp. Gather my loyal men, we are getting my family back. After that, I will deal with my mother. 20 hours after the ransom video arrived, Victor knew Tony was holding them in a deserted warehouse in New Jersey, an hour from the city. His source confirmed Tony had around 15 gunmen on site. They were all killers. Victor did not care. He would kill them all if necessary. At midnight, Victor's convoy sped toward the warehouse. He had 20 men, the most loyal in his family, armed and ready to die for him. But Victor led the charge himself. This was his family, his war. They stopped 500 meters away and moved forward in the darkness. Victor signaled for his men to surround the building. He chambered a round in his weapon and walked straight for the front gate. He was not sneaking in. He wanted Tony to see him coming. The first shot rang out as a guard spotted him. The bullet tore through his jacket, but Victor did not flinch. He fired back twice, and the guard went down. The night exploded into chaos and gunfire. The darkness was torn apart by muzzle flashes. The air filled with shouts of the wounded. Victor's men swarmed the compound, engaging Tony's crew. Bodies began to fall. But Victor only moved forward. He pushed toward the main building, taking down anyone in his path. A bullet tore through his upper arm, but he felt no pain. The only pain was imagining Amelia and Ethan inside, afraid. Victor kicked the warehouse door open and entered with his gun raised. The space was nearly dark, lit by a few dim bulbs. He heard Ethan crying from down the corridor, and his heart seized. He ran toward the sound, eliminating 2 more men on the way. Then he saw them. Amelia was on the floor, hands bound, her face bruised, but her eyes locked on his. Ethan sat in a corner, sobbing, until he saw Victor. Then, the boy's eyes lit up. Victor! Ethan's small voice cried out. He is here to save us! Victor started toward them, but a cold laugh from the shadows stopped him. How touching, Carbone! Tony Moreno emerged, his pistol aimed at Victor's head. The most ruthless man in New York has a soft heart. Who knew? Victor faced his rival. Tony looked rougher than before, his face a map of scars, but his eyes were still wild. Drop the gun, Tony snapped, or the girl gets it first. He aimed at Amelia. Victor looked from Amelia to Ethan, then back to Tony. He let his weapon fall and raised his hands. You win, Victor said calmly. Tony smirked and stepped closer, blind to the knife in Victor's sleeve. As Tony came near, Victor moved. He knocked the gun away as it fired, the bullet singing past his ear. In the same instant, Victor drove the knife home. The knife plunged deep into Tony's stomach. He shrieked and fell, his gun still trying to find a target. Victor kicked the weapon away, dropped onto Tony's chest, and began to rain down punches. The sounds of impact were sickening. He did not stop. He hammered away until Tony's face was a ruin, until the man beneath him was still. Victor rose, his breathing ragged, and looked down at the broken figure. "This is for touching my family," Victor said, his voice like winter. He motioned to Marco, who had just arrived. "Get him out of my sight. I am not done with him." Then he spun and raced to Amelia and Ethan. He sliced through Amelia's bonds and pulled her close, her body trembling against his. Ethan crawled to them, his small arms wrapping around them both as he sobbed. They held on to each other, surrounded by chaos and the smell of cordite. But they were alive. They were together. And Victor would never let them be separated again. He sank to his knees. He knelt beside Amelia, his hands unsteady as he sawed through the thick ropes. Her wrists were raw and bleeding, the skin torn away after so many hours. As the final piece of rope fell away, Amelia sagged against him, shaking without end. Victor clutched her, ignoring the blood from his own arms seeping into her shirt. He did not notice the smell of gunpowder or the bodies around them. She was alive. She was safe in his arms. That was everything. "I am so sorry," Victor choked out, his voice thick. "I should have protected you. For all of this, I am sorry." Amelia said nothing. She just held on tighter, her tears cutting paths through the dirt on her face. She had been so sure she would die there, certain that Ethan would see her killed. But Victor came. He had found them. "Mommy?" Ethan's voice was a tiny, fragile sound. Amelia turned, opening her arms for him. Ethan scrambled into her arms, his small body racked with sobs. He clung to her neck, his broken cries filling the silent warehouse. "I was so scared, Mommy," he wept. "They hurt you. I called for you, but you were sleeping. I thought you were gone." "Mommy is fine, my love," Amelia whispered, kissing his hair over and over. "I am right here. I am not going anywhere." Ethan pulled back and looked at Victor, who knelt beside them. His eyes were puffy from crying, but a new understanding was there. "Mommy told me," Ethan said quietly. "She said Victor is my daddy." He explained how she told him that his father would come for them, that he should not be afraid because his daddy would never abandon him. Victor stared at Amelia, his face a mask of shock. She gave a small, tearful nod. She had told their son the truth in their final moments, believing it was her only chance. She had wanted Ethan to know his father, even just for a moment. "And Daddy did come," Ethan said, his gaze locked on Victor. "Daddy saved us. You hurt the bad men. You are my hero." The boy released his mother and did something Victor never thought possible. Ethan wrapped his thin arms around Victor's neck, holding tight as if he might vanish. "I love you, Daddy," he whispered. "Do not leave again. Stay with us forever." Victor went rigid. In his 36 years, he had held the power of life and death. He had made a city fear his name. But he had never felt anything like this. He had never been loved so completely, so needed. He had never been called Daddy. Tears streamed down Victor's cheeks, only the second time he had ever cried. Both times had been for this little 4-year-old boy. He hugged Ethan back fiercely, pulling Amelia in to complete the circle, holding the only two people who mattered. "Daddy promises," Victor said, his voice shaking but firm. "I am never going anywhere again. I will stay with you and Mommy forever. I will protect you with my last breath. No one will ever hurt you again." In the dark warehouse, they clung to each other. A broken family, torn apart by 5 years of secrets, was finally whole. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Victor's men were clearing the area, but none dared to interrupt them. Marco stood guard at the door, his own eyes wet, watching the most powerful man in New York weep in the arms of a small child. 3 days later, with Amelia and Ethan safe at his estate, Victor called a meeting of New York's most powerful families. It was a summit he had avoided for too long, a gathering where he would finally answer for his past. The meeting took place at a private Italian restaurant in Manhattan, a neutral ground where the city's dons settled their disputes. 7 families were represented at the long table. 7 bosses sat in silence, each flanked by 2 guards. Don Benedetti watched Victor from across the room, his eyes like chips of ice. Alexandra was next to her father, her anger barely hidden. At the far end, Catherine Carbone sat with her back straight, her chin high, a picture of false innocence. Victor rose to his feet, and the room fell quiet. He put a briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside were folders, one for each Don. "I called you here to reveal the truth," Victor announced. "The truth about why I ended my engagement to Alexandra Benedetti, and the truth about crimes committed within my own family." Don Benedetti examined the documents, his brow creased. "What is this?" "That is proof," Victor said, his voice ringing with authority. "Proof that 5 years ago, my mother, Catherine Carbone, threatened to murder the woman I loved. She also threatened the son I never knew she was carrying. She pressed a gun against the head of a pregnant woman. Then she forced her away with just $5,000 and a bus ticket. After that, she hired detectives to make sure I could never find them." Catherine jumped up, her face pale. "Victor, you can't." "I am not done," Victor said, his voice cutting like glass. 3 days ago, after I finally found my family, my mother did something worse. She called Tony Moreno, an enemy of our family. She gave him the location of my son and his mother. She tried to sell her own grandson to our enemy." A heavy silence filled the room. The Dons looked at each other, then turned to Catherine with new eyes. In their world, family was sacred. To betray your own blood was the ultimate crime. "That is a lie," Catherine shrieked. "That orphan girl made it all up. She manipulated my son." "This is the recording of your call with Tony Moreno," Victor said, and pressed play. Catherine's voice filled the air, cold and clear. "I have some information about Victor Carbone's weakness that might interest you." Catherine froze, the blood draining from her face. She could not deny it. The voice was hers. The words were hers. Before the 7 most powerful men in the city, her betrayal was exposed. Don Benedetti shut the folder. His face was impossible to read. "So you broke the engagement with my daughter for a bastard child and some woman I do not know." "I broke the engagement because my heart is with someone else," Victor answered, his tone calm but unyielding. "I know this could mean war, but I will not build my future on a lie. My son needs a true family, not a political arrangement." Don Benedetti was quiet for a long time. His fingers tapped the table. Alexandra started to speak, but her father silenced her with a look. "You are a brave man," Don Benedetti finally said. "You stand here and publicly shame my daughter. You destroy an alliance we spent 2 years building. You realize I could declare war this very moment." "I know," Victor replied, "and I am ready for the consequences. But I hope you see what my mother did and understand I had no choice." Don Benedetti looked from Catherine back to Victor. He considered this, then rose from his chair. "There will be no war," he declared with finality. "Not because I excuse this insult. It is because I will not side with someone who betrays their own kin. Catherine Carbone broke our most sacred code. The alliance is over, but we will have peace. However, Victor, you now owe me. One day I will come to collect." He turned and left the room. Alexandra followed, never once looking back at Victor. The other Dons departed one by one, each giving Victor a nod of new respect. They had seen a man defy his own mother and sacrifice a powerful alliance for his true family. That kind of loyalty was rare. Soon, only Victor and Catherine were left. She looked at her son with pure hatred. "You have ruined everything," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You ruined all that I built." "No, mother," Victor said, turning to leave. You did this to yourself. A week later, the Dons met again to pass judgment on Catherine Carbone. Victor did not call this meeting. It was a decision made by the council. Betraying family to an enemy was a threat to them all. If it went unpunished, it would set a dangerous example. Catherine was brought before them. She no longer wore fine silks or pearls. She was in a simple black dress, her hair unpinned and falling around her shoulders. Under the light, the silver in her hair was visible. For the first time, Catherine Carbone looked like a simple old woman, her power and influence gone. Victor sat at the end of the table and watched his mother. His eyes were empty of all feeling. He had no more tears or anger left, only a void. The woman before him was once his mother. She had held him as a child and taught him how to survive in this cruel world. But she had also stolen 5 years of his life. She had threatened the woman he loved and sold out her own grandson. Don Benedetti rose and read the verdict. Catherine Carbone, you have broken our most sacred rule. You betrayed your own blood and conspired with an enemy. The council has decided to remove all your power and status in the Carbone family. You will be exiled to a remote location to live out your days alone. You may not contact anyone in our community. You may never return to New York. If you break these rules, you will be executed immediately. Catherine stood tall, her chin up, but Victor saw her hands shake. She did not beg for mercy. She knew it would be useless. In their world, the council's word was final. You will regret this, Catherine said, her voice still cold. The Carbone family will fall apart without me. Victor will ruin everything for that orphan and her bastard son. The Carbone family will survive, Victor said, stepping forward to face her one last time. But it will not be because of you. You taught me that family is everything. But you never understood what that means. Family is not about power or bloodlines. It is about people who love each other without conditions. People who protect each other no matter the cost. Amelia and Ethan are my family. You never were. Catherine looked at him, and for a moment, something shifted in her eyes. It was not regret, but deep disappointment. She had gambled everything to control him, and she had failed. I made you, she said, her voice a tired whisper. I made you into the most powerful man in this city. You created a man who could not love, Victor stated. But Amelia and Ethan showed me a better way. I refuse to be like you. I will not sacrifice my family for control. He turned and left without looking back. 2 guards escorted Catherine to a car. She was sent to a remote house to live out her days alone, far from the city. The drive home was silent for Victor. As he entered his house, Ethan ran to him, wrapping his arms around his legs. Daddy's home, the boy cried out. Look at my picture. It is Daddy, Mommy, and me. Victor lifted his son and saw the drawing. Then he saw Amelia smiling warmly from the kitchen. He knew then that he had not lost a mother, but gained a true family. 3 months after Catherine's exile, Victor's world was transformed. He managed the Carbone Empire, but his work no longer consumed 18 hours a day. His days ended with family dinners and bedtime stories for Ethan. He woke to his son's laughter. Amelia opened a new bakery in a prime location. Victor set it up perfectly, but she insisted on paying the rent herself. Her strength and pride, unbroken by everything she had suffered, made him love her more. One fall evening, with Ethan asleep, Victor took Amelia to the balcony. He knelt down, opening a small velvet box. Inside was a simple diamond ring, more precious than the one from 5 years before. 6 years ago, I asked you something, he began, but I failed to keep my promise. Victor's voice was shaking. Let me ask again. Amelia, will you be my wife? This is not for power. It is because I love you. I loved you through 5 years of being apart, and I will love you until I die. Tears streamed down Amelia's face, but she smiled and nodded. With trembling hands, Victor slipped the ring on her finger. They held each other under the moon, two souls who had found their way back from darkness. 1 month later, they married in Father Thomas's small church. It was an intimate gathering, with only Marco and their closest friends present. There were no crowds or cameras, only genuine love. Amelia wore a simple white dress and looked radiant. Ethan, dressed in a tiny suit, proudly carried the rings. When asked to be a witness, he shouted, "I do, to everyone's delight." Victor's voice cracked during his vows. "I lived in darkness until you and Ethan showed me how to be a better man. I will protect you forever." Amelia answered through her own tears. "You were the storm that wrecked my life, but you were also the shore I always came back to. I forgive you, Victor, and I will love you eternally." They kissed, and Ethan joined their embrace, shouting, "We are a real family now." 1 year later, their lives were completely different. Victor was still in charge, but he moved the family business into legal enterprises, determined to give Ethan a clean future. Amelia's bakery flourished in Brooklyn, a success she built herself. All she needed from Victor was his presence. Ethan, now a healthy 5-year-old after his operation, was thriving. His pictures were finally complete, always showing a happy family of 3. One evening, he snuggled between his parents for a story. Victor told one about a prince who was reunited with his lost princess and son, and how they lived happily from then on. "That story is like ours," Ethan mumbled before falling asleep. "Yes, son," Victor whispered, kissing him goodnight. "Exactly like ours." Later, as they looked over the glowing city, Amelia asked, "Do you regret what you gave up?" Victor smiled at her. "I lost an alliance and my mother's approval. In return, I gained a brave wife, an amazing son, and a true family. It was the best deal of my life." She rested her head on his shoulder as they sat in peace. They were two souls from different worlds, torn apart by years of pain, now finally together. And a little boy slept soundly, dreaming of the family he had wished for. This shows that real family is about unconditional love, not wealth or power. Sometimes, the most courageous act is protecting the people you love, no matter the cost. It is never too late to forgive and start over. If you have enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and activate notifications for more content like this. We also invite you to like and share this video to spread its message of love. We want to hear your thoughts on Victor and Amelia's journey. Have you ever faced a hard choice for your family? Can love truly conquer all? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section. We read every one. We wish all of you health, happiness, and peace. Thank you for joining us. We will see you in our next video. His content has been carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful stories and valuable life lessons.